And now to discuss the importance of commemorating Freedom Day, we are now joined by political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng, and she joins us via our Zoom link. Asanda, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition on SABC News. Of course, taking it back to 1994, a number of promises were made. It is 29 years later now. Why would you say should South Africans still continue to celebrate, of course, a Freedom Day?
I think this day is very important because it's a day of reflection. It's a day of reflecting from the fact that we are no longer bound by colonialism. We are no longer bound by race-based discrimination under the laws of apartheid. And so while we haven't reached all of our goals and not all of the promises of 1994 have been realized, there is still so much that we can celebrate. Like, for an example, as a Black woman, I can live where I want to live. I can take my children to the school of my choosing rather than being forced into Bantu education because of my race. I can self-declare as Black instead of being told by the state that I'm Black or I'm colored or I'm whatever race that they've decided for me based on their criteria. And there's so many other things that we were not allowed to do during colonialism and during apartheid that we are now able to do. And we must never lose sight of that, because it's when we lose sight of that we make the mistake of thinking that because we're not happy with our democracy and its current state, that it was all in vain. It cannot ever have been in vain, because no matter how bad the situation is, it is uncomparable to where we are coming from as a Black nation in particular.
And as we reflect back, it's 29 years now since South Africa, realized its democracy and realized freedom. One would say that there has been a number of challenges, while we also know that, there are a number of achievements, particularly looking at young South Africans. We have a very high unemployment rate. And when you even look at the voting patterns, it is young people who are seen not going to the polls. And if we reflect even back to the 2021 local government elections, that was the problem there. What would you say a day like this should mean to young South Africans who say that, well, the future looks bleak as we see a very high unemployment rate, we have a stagnant economy, and some of them are sitting at home with their degrees?
I think, one of the first things I always try to remind young people is that even my existence as a youngish person who spends her time speaking on platforms like this, critiquing the current government of the day, that it's in itself is a reminder of the kind of freedom that we have. Because across the African continent, someone like me does not exist, because they get killed, they get imprisoned, and all kinds of horrible things happen because there isn't freedom of speech. And so when it comes to unemployment, I think we also need to be aware of the context in which South Africa is coming from. We are coming from in the 90s, if you think about it, in the early 2000s, the number of young Black people in particular who were making it as far as matric was quite low. The number who were getting into post-matric education was even lower. And so all of those people were able to very quickly get jobs because there were so few of them. So what has happened is that in some ways one can even say we are in essence a victim of our success, in the sense that we now have more people who are reaching secondary education. And so the dropout rate is still high, but it's high. People are dropping out at higher grades than in previous years. And I was looking at the numbers for this. And we're also seeing that there are more people entering the education system and more people coming out of the education system. And I was looking at even the numbers that if you compare the dropout rate in 2010, you were looking at almost half of the people who entered the education system were dropping out. Those numbers are much lower now. You're looking at about 20%, so a quarter rather than half. And that means there are more people able to enter the system with university degrees. And we see high graduate unemployment, for example, because there are so much more graduates than there are actual jobs. I think that, what's important for the government to consider is to rethink particularly the social grant system and the amount of money that is being spent on the social grant system, because we are spending billions on a social grant system that doesn't have an exit and that doesn't have a clear laid out plan that says we want to support people and provide a safety net, but these are the exit points that we envision for people, and these are the, this is how we're going to use this money to ensure that less people are on the social system. So the social system is supposed to be a safety net for people who are unable to access the economy. You're not supposed to have such a large chunk of your population on the social net, because that is an indication of a failing economy and of an economy that is not inclusive and that is not engaging as many South Africans as it should. And so the government needs to really think hard about the kind of economy that we have and the ways in which the money that they receive from taxpayers is spent, and what activities they put in place to ensure that there is more job creation beyond, the 3-month PWP program where people are only employed for 3 months. And I must say, I've been excited to see, for example, the introduction of teaching assistants at former black schools, where in former white schools, teaching assistants have always been there, and that has improved the education outcomes of young people there. And hopefully we'll start seeing even further improvements in education outcomes of people, because teachers have better support than before COVID. But also we must be aware that, we are living in a post-COVID world where there is an economic global meltdown. And so no matter how good South Africa was doing, we were still going to be in trouble because the whole world is in trouble. But our trouble is also compounded and made to be even worse by the fact that our government has failed to produce a consistent energy supply. And so our government needs to look at the economy, they need to look at the energy, and they need to figure out how to provide a consistent energy supply to ensure that people are able to produce the goods that will then be sold on the market. And by having a healthy economy, people will be able to afford those goods, and so employment itself will increase. If we could just get some of these things right, then we'd be in a better position. But we can't say because we are sitting with high unemployment that it's a sign that everything is wrong with the country. We need to understand the context for that.
And Asanda, what would you say, has been the contributing factors or the challenges that government has been facing in terms of everybody in South Africa realizing and feeling the freedoms gained 29 years ago?
I think that, one of the things I do, for instance, is diversity training. And when I do this training, I try to help people to understand the impact of the past on the present. And one of the long-lasting legacies of apartheid is that it was oppression, not only, via the law physically, but it was also psychological. And so it taught Black people that we are unworthy. It taught Black people that we don't belong in certain spaces. And it taught Black people that we don't deserve the best. And so one of the things that we need to spend a lot of time doing, and I do it as a mentor to young people, and many other South Africans do it, is to constantly remind young people that they are worthy, that they belong in all spaces, and that they have the potential to become whatever they want to. And the second thing that we need to do is ensure that every South African is doing whatever they can, wherever they can, to contribute towards a positive outcome for young people, using whatever money they have and whatever resources they have and whatever skills they have, because that is the only way that South Africa is going to do better. And we need to hold not only government accountable, but we also need to hold private enterprise. Business in South Africa doesn't always come to the table. They are able to extract millions and millions of rands from South Africans through labor and through the products that they sell to us, but they don't always contribute positively to society. We are seeing less and less bursary schemes. We're seeing less and less community social investment projects, and it's not acceptable that that business can kind of slowly pull out of its role. It's a very important role of community engagement. Right. It's very important role of supporting government in building, the kind of South Africa that we want, in building the kind of South Africa where every single child has and is guaranteed a bright future, because we are a rich country. We have so many minerals, and we have, this beautiful country that we sell to tourists, and it doesn't make sense that anyone in South Africa is poor when we consider, you know, our ability just by virtue of the natural resources we have under the ground, and you know, the humanity that we have and our ability to treat even tourists very well. So we need to develop those sectors more, and we need to invest in people who are working in those sectors, particularly Black South Africans, to ensure that they are also,
we are running out of time
enjoying.
there, Asanda. Thank you so much for your contributions. Of course, that is Asanda Ngoasheng reflecting there on 29 years of freedom in the country.